Widow with 4 kids and a blind grandfather. A kind farmer took all 6 in. The mule wouldn't load. That's where it started, if I'm being straight about it. Not with Clara Dent's face, not with the sound those kids made when they were hungry, not with the old man's white eyes catching the sun like 2 chips of quartz. It started with my mule, Hector, planting all 4 feet and refusing to take another step toward the feed barn, and me standing there in the yard on a September morning with a bad shoulder and a worse temper, wondering what in the hell I'd done to deserve such a morning. I heard the wagon before I saw it. The axle had a squeal to it, the kind that means the wheel's been loose for a while and nobody's had the time or the grease to fix it. I turned around. The wagon was a sorry thing. One sideboard cracked, the canvas top gone except for 1 iron hoop sticking up bare, and 4 children ranging from maybe 3 years old to maybe 10 sitting in the bed of it like 4 little stones somebody had dropped there. A man sat up front in the box beside the woman driving, old, white-haired, his head tilted at that particular angle that told me before I even looked close that he wasn't seeing anything. Blind. The woman held the reins with both hands, sitting straight, her jaw set, dust on her collar and her hat brim and the backs of her hands. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the road, what was left of it where my gate began. She pulled the mule team up, 2 sway-backed grays that had seen better years than this one. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said. She didn't sound sorry, she sounded tired. "Our wheel's about to go, I can see it from here and I'm not a wagon right. We just need to stop. An hour, maybe. Get it fixed if it can be fixed, rest the animals." I looked at the wheel. She was right. The iron tire had worked half off the rim and the wood was split at the hub. "That wheel's not going another mile," I said. "I know it." She didn't argue, didn't ask for anything more. She just sat there with those reins in her hands, waiting to see what kind of man I was. I'm not going to dress that up. I stood there for a moment and I thought about the shoulder and Hector and the morning I'd already had. Then I opened the gate. "My name is Walter Cade. I run 340 acres in the Cimarron Breaks, wheat in the North Field, a small herd, a kitchen garden that my wife Nora planted 12 years ago and that I have not once in the 4 years since she died let go to seed. I don't entirely know why. Habit, maybe, or because a thing she did deserves to keep being done. I had no children, had 2 early on and lost them both before they were old enough to speak a full sentence. After Nora went, I had the land, the animals, a good dog named August who was getting old, and most evenings a quiet so deep it'd wait to it. That is not a complaint. I want to be straight about that. I chose it, or I settled into it. After a while, those feel the same. So when I opened that gate, I wasn't looking for anything. I was fixing a wagon wheel on a September morning, because the wheel needed fixing, and there were children in that wagon bed, and I wasn't the kind of man who drove away from that. Her name was Clara Dent, née Hargrove, widowed 14 months by then. Her husband Thomas had been a freighter, a solid man by her account, not given to drink or cruelty, just given to bad luck at the wrong moment, a wheel pin on a canyon grade, a load shifted, and then nothing. She had been living since with her father-in-law, the old blind man whose name was Emmett Dent. She called him Papa. The children called him Papa, too, which is the kind of thing that tells you something about a family, even when you don't know them at all. The 4 children, Ruth, who was 10 and already had her mother's jaw, James, who was 8 and too quiet, me, who was 6 and cried easily but stopped fast, which I have always thought is actually the right way to cry, and the youngest, a boy called Clement who was 3 and had no useful opinions about anything but communicated them loudly regardless. They climbed out of the wagon bed one by one while I looked at the wheel. Emmett Dent stepped down with Clara's hand on his elbow. He stood in my yard and turned his face to the sun, and then he turned it toward me, though he couldn't see me, and he said, "Smells like good ground." "Yes, sir," I said. "Wheat. North Field, some alfalfa on the creek bottom." He nodded slow. "The sound of this place is right," he said. "Quiet where it ought to be quiet, noise where it ought to be noisy. I can hear your windmill. I can hear your dog over there by the barn. You got chickens. 6 hens and a rooster. Hear him too," he smiled at nothing in particular. "Sound of a well-kept place." I didn't say anything to that. I went and got my tools. The hub was worse than I thought. The wood had cracked inward from damp rot, not just road strain, which meant the iron tire wasn't the problem, the wheel itself was. I didn't have a spare that would fit their axle exactly, but I had wheel stock in the barn from a rig I'd broken down 2 years prior, and I thought I could turn something close enough. That's not an hour of work. That is half a day done right. I told her. She looked at the barn, then at the wheel, then at the kids who had found the dog and were sitting with August in the dust by the water trough. We can camp outside your fence line, she said. I don't want to put you out. I have a cookhouse, I said. Hasn't been used in a while, but there's a stove and a table. She looked at me then, not long, just a reading look, the kind of look that takes in more than a face. I'd pay you, she said. I don't have money, but I'd pay in work, whatever you need done around here. There's no need. There is, she said. For me there is. I understood that. A person who keeps their own terms even when things are hard, that's not pride. That's how a person stays themselves. All right, I said. I could use the garden turned over before the frost, the west beds. I can do that. And there's a fence line on the creek that wants restringing. I can do that too. So that's how it was agreed. Half a day turned into a day turned into 3 days because the second evening it rained hard and the road out was axle-deep mud by morning. Clara didn't complain about the mud. She turned the west garden beds while the kids helped in the way children help, which is to say me and Ruth actually helped. James carried rocks mostly, and Clement sat in the turned earth and became thoroughly one with it, which made the dog happy. Emmett sat on the cookhouse step with his face toward whatever direction the wind was coming from and listened to all of it and said, every now and then, something that was quietly correct. The ground will drain by noon, it did. That hen sounds sick, she was. Ruth's got a good head on her, that one. She did. I ate with them those evenings because it would have been strange not to. Clara cooked on the cookhouse stove, and it was better food than I made myself, made from the same rough stores but somehow different. She found dried herbs on the shelf, things Nora had put up that I'd never used, and she used them without asking if she could, and I found I didn't mind. The third night the kids were in bed, and Emmett was asleep in his corner chair, and Clara and I were at the table with coffee going cold between us, and she said, "Where are you from, Mr. Cade?" Before here. "Missouri," I said, "long time ago." "What brought you out?" I was quiet a moment. My wife wanted to come. She had a notion about land of our own, so we came. Clara wrapped both hands around her cup, and she passed. 4 years ago. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for your loss, too, I said. Thomas. She nodded once. He was a good man, not a complicated man. He got up every morning and did what was in front of him, and he was kind to us. And that sounds like it ought to be enough, but somehow you don't know it's enough until it's gone. That landed somewhere in me and sat down heavy. We didn't say much after that. But we sat there another half hour before she said good night and took herself in. Day 4, she restrung the fence line on the creek. I was working alongside her because that stretch had been bothering me all season and I wanted to see it done right, and because, if I'm being honest, I'd found that the day went differently when there was someone to work alongside. Not better or worse, just different. Fuller, maybe. The kind of full that you didn't know was missing until it showed up again. Ruth came out at noon with wrapped bread and jerky, and we ate sitting on the creek bank with our boots off and our feet over the edge. The water was low that time of year, and cold the way only creek water gets in the shade. "Papa says you're a careful man," Ruth said to me. "Does he?" "He says he can tell by the way your boots sound on the ground. Says a man who walks careful is a man who pays attention." I looked at Clara. She was looking at the water. "Your grandfather is perceptive," I said. "He knows a lot," Ruth said, fully confident. "He knew when Daddy wasn't coming back before Mama told us. He didn't say anything, but we could tell he knew." Clara said quietly, "Ruth." "It's true," Ruth said, not sullen, just steady, that jaw of hers. She'd use it her whole life, and she'd be right to. 7 days. The road dried, the wheel was fitted and set, the fence line was strung, the garden beds were turned. There was no reason left. I watched Clara load the wagon the morning of the 8th day. She had a system, the heavy things first, the children's things accessible, Emmett's blanket where he could reach it without asking. She had been doing this a long time, loading up and moving on. You could see it in how she moved. James was loading a crate of jars, careful with his hands. Me had found a grasshopper and was informing Clement about it in detail. Clement cared mainly about the grasshopper. I was holding a sack of flour I'd brought out from the root cellar. I set it in the wagon bed without saying anything about it. Clara saw me do it. She didn't say I shouldn't. She just looked at me with level eyes and said thank you, which cost her something. I could see that, and I nodded. Then Emmett Dent turned from his seat in the wagon box and put his face toward me and said, "Walter Cade." "Yes, sir." "You got too much silence in this place." I didn't say anything. "I spent a long time with silence after I went blind," he said. "Thought it was what I deserved, maybe, or just what I had. Takes a while to know the difference." He paused. "You're a man with good ground and an honest place. Don't let it go quiet all the way." The wagon moved. August sat beside me and watched it go down the road. I stood there a while. She came back 2 weeks later. I was in the north field when I heard the wagon. I knew the squeal of that axle, new wheel, but she hadn't had the old one on the other side looked at, and the left rear still had a moan to it going downhill. I'd noticed it and said nothing because it wasn't my wagon. I walked out to the road. She'd left the kids somewhere, not with her. She was alone on the box except for Emmett, who was asleep against the side rail. She pulled up. "The town we were headed for," she said. "Dalton, it isn't what was described to me." She stopped, tried again. "The land claim I was told about is already taken, has been for 2 years. The man who wrote me the letter was wrong or lying, I don't know which. Either way, it doesn't matter now." I waited. "I have $40, she said, "and I can work. I can work a full day and then some. The children are good workers, the older ones. Papa knows livestock. He knows them better than most sighted men I've met. He can hear a sick animal from across a yard." I was looking up at her on the box. The sun was behind me and she was squinting a little. "What I'd need to know," she said, "before I say the rest of it, what I'd need to know is whether you're the kind of man who does a thing because it needs doing and that's the end of it, or whether you're the kind that might want something built here." The wind moved across the wheat. September still, but the first edge of something colder in it. "My wife planted a garden," I said. "I've been keeping it. I didn't know why I was keeping it. Maybe I do now." She was quiet for a long moment. "I'm not going to be easy," she said. "I have opinions, and I have 4 children and an old blind man, and not much money, and I've been on my own long enough that I don't shed that easily." "I'm not asking you to shed it." She looked at me for a while. "No," she said, "I don't think you are." She set the brake and climbed down from the box. She walked to where I was standing and she put out her hand and I took it, the way you close a deal on something, and then she didn't let go. Her hand was dry and calloused and strong, and she stood there holding mine and looked at me with those level eyes and said, "All right, Walter." That was all right, Walter. Emmett Dent woke up then because he had a gift for timing, and turned his face toward us and said without any preamble, "He say yes." "He said yes," Clara said. "Good," said Emmett. He settled his hat. "Now go get my grandchildren. This wagon seat is getting hard." I'll tell you what I remember about that winter, if you want to know what changed. What I remember is August sleeping by the cook stove, with 3 of the 4 children piled around him, and the old dog not minding it at all. I remember Clement, who had no useful opinions about anything, figuring out that I kept hard candy in the top left drawer of my desk and standing outside my office doorway every evening, just standing there. Not saying anything, just standing, waiting. We never spoke about it. I kept the drawer full. I remember Emmett on the porch most mornings with his coffee cup, listening to the place the way a man reads a newspaper, telling me things I'd have missed. The second heifer's early, she's pacing funny. The north pasture gate wasn't latched last night, I heard it wasn't. James is sad about something, has been for 3 days. He was right about James. I remember Ruth arguing with me about the best way to harvest wheat, and being approximately 60% correct, and taking the 40% wrong in stride once I showed her. I remember me crying one evening, a different kind of crying than I'd seen from her before, quiet and confused, and Clara holding her at the kitchen table, and me getting up and finding reasons to be in another part of the house because some things aren't mine to walk into. But I remember Clara catching my eye across the room before I went, a look that said she knew I knew, and that was enough. And I remember a night in January, hard cold, ice on the inside of the windows, wind saying things against the eaves it had no business saying. I was up late with the stove, adding wood, and Clara came in from the bedroom hallway in her coat over her nightgown, and she stood there. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "Neither could I." She sat down across from me, and we watched the stove a while. The cold outside and the fire inside, and the sound of 6 people sleeping. She said, "You didn't have to do this." "I know. But you did." "Yes." She looked at the stove, then she looked at me. Then she reached across the table and put her hand on mine and left it there. Not a deal this time, just a hand. "Thank you, Walter," she said, quiet as something settling. I turned my hand over and held hers back. Outside, the wind worked at the eaves and didn't get in. Inside was ours, what we'd made of it. That's what I remember most, I think. The weight of her hand and the fire and the 6 people sleeping and the cold held outside where the cold belonged. I am 67 years old, and that is still the fullest I have ever felt in a room.